It's the Security Weekly News, and it's episode 385. I'm Doug White, and it is Friday, the 10th of May, 2024. We've got easy passwords, Big IP, Ascension, Lockbit, Google, Poland, ZScaler, Aaran Leyland, and more on this edition of the Security Weekly News.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
It's the show that keeps you up to date on the latest security news twice a week. Your trusted source for accurate security information and expert analysis. It's time for the Security Weekly News.
Hi, folks. I'm Adrian Sanabria, the host of Enterprise Security Weekly. Every week, we interview the most interesting folks we can find talking about the most pressing cybersecurity issues and challenges facing the enterprise today. Myself and my co-hosts have each been in the industry for decades, long enough to see the patterns in the industry and explore where trends are going. In addition to enterprise challenges, we also follow the vendor space, the most interesting security startups emerging, technology and product trends, all of the most interesting funding and acquisition announcements. Finally, we love to discuss the latest trends in tech and how they'll impact cybersecurity. If you're wondering how the latest in AI, quantum computing, cloud, and DevOps is going to impact security a few years down the road, you should follow the Enterprise Security Weekly podcast.
All right, it's the Security Weekly News from the island of Elba. I'm Doug White. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button as if your life depended on it, because if you don't push it every 108 minutes, it may well cause the end of reality as we know it. You just never know about that. Well, it's been a while since we had Big IP on the show, but they're back, the F5 product, and they have two new high-severity vulnerabilities in the Next Central Manager. Those two vulnerabilities can be exploited together to allow you to get root, and then you can create hidden accounts that on any of the managed assets by this management product. Now, Next Central Manager is a UI that helps to allow the control of all your Big IP Next instances, so both cloud and on-premises. And the flaws are an SQL injection vulnerability and an OData injection in the Big IP Next Central Manager API. So basically, the vulnerabilities are going to allow an unauthenticated attacker, so you would never want to hear that, a remote, in fact, unauthenticated attacker, to execute SQL statements on any unpatched devices remotely. And of course, if you can execute SQL statements, you can push users and things into the database. Eclipsium reported on the flaws initially, and they shared a proof of concept exploit on Wednesday. That which of course will very likely lead to in the wild exploits. They said that rogue accounts created by the compromise are not visible from the Next Central Manager. So there was a way to hide these accounts, which means they could have been created already. They could already be there. And then that allows, of course, the creation of persistence, which means it's very difficult to detect if these have been exploited. The exploits can be conducted by anyone who has access to the administrative UI. F5, who's the maker of Big IP, said that if you could not install the security update that they released on Wednesday, you should restrict Next Central Manager access to only trusted users over a secure network. Wait a minute. I'm like, you mean you don't normally do that? Yeah, I mean, I agree with what they said, but you should be doing that already. But if you're not, well, then you have a problem. But Eclipsium said that they had no evidence that the exploits have been seen in the wild. But like I said, when they release a proof of concept, pretty soon it won't be long. Shodan said they're currently tracking 10,000 Big IP devices with exposed management ports online, but they could not determine how many of those were running Next Central Manager, since apparently there's alternatives to that. But there are patches, so you can patch this, but at the very least, you should restrict all this access, and you should do that whether you patch or not. Ascension is one of the largest healthcare providers in the United States, and they have now taken some of their systems offline to investigate what they called, quote, a cyber event. Ascension, if you're not familiar with them, is a nonprofit healthcare system that operates 140 hospitals, 40 senior care facilities in 19 states and the District of Columbia. They have about 8,500 providers that are also affiliated with them. 35,000 separate affiliated providers that are like, I guess that the actual providers are part of Ascension, and then they have affiliate third parties. 134,000 associates, and had a total revenue last year of 28.3 billion with a B dollars. The event was apparently detected on Wednesday of this week, and they said that access to some systems had been interrupted as their investigative process continues. They also advised business partners to sever connections to the systems until further announcements were made. Now, that of course is pretty ominous for all these healthcare providers. If you haven't pen tested a hospital or even been in a hospital lately, well, good for you, but they basically rely on these types of services now for everything, since they just don't do paperwork anymore. They don't, all those old charts and things they don't have. Everybody's running around with iPads and whatnot, and it's all electronic. In fact, I did an audit slash tabletop exercise at a hospital, and they couldn't even do x-rays if their network was down because all their x-ray equipment was digital. The guy was telling us that, 20 years ago they had film and they developed it, and as they phased it out, they could still do that as a fallback, but they didn't even have that anymore. So it's all digital. Considering that the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services warned about attackers using social engineering to target hospital IT help desk, and the fact that all the medical records and everything else are now connected, so all these affiliates, sub offices, clinics, etc., are all interconnected at this point. This is really one of the most critical sectors that we have, because you have patients who may die if you can't treat them. If you have accident victims, you can't do an x-ray because it's down, you've been ransomware or whatever. But the threat surface here has become just massive, and it's all interconnected. I mean, everything from insurance companies to clinics to treatment centers to drug suppliers are all connected to these networks. So if you can take out the Calaveras County, health clinic, that may be connected to a regional hospital, and that's connected to a much bigger hospital somewhere else, and so on and so on and so on. And here we're calling out Augustus de Morgan again. So the two lessons here: if you're in healthcare, well, batten down the hatches. I mean, they've already issued a warning saying they're after you, they're coming, be ready. But you know what? I mean, supply chain. We can say that enough. And Biggie Smalls did not appear when I said that 3 times. But any one of those cutely named APTs may well, and Cozy Bear or Eyeball Spider or whatever, may be creeping in through that really tiny crack over in the corner of the basement behind all those little stereo speakers that have been sitting there a long time. So you need to be ready. Ascension says the attack is indeed impacting patient care as they've shut down systems. So look, whether you're in healthcare or not, be ready. And you may be connected to some healthcare too. So, even if you say, oh, well, yeah, we just make light bulbs, you may actually be attached to some healthcare providers as well. So be warned. The United States Department of Justice unsealed charges against a Russian national on the 7th of May for their alleged role as the creator, developer, and administrator of Lockbit. A 26-count indictment by a grand jury in the District of New Jersey said that since September of 2019, Dmitry Yureyevich Koroshev of Voronezh, Russia, sorry about the pronunciation, Russian friends, with Lockbit ransomware group, attacked more than 2,500 victims in at least 120 countries, including 1,800 victims in the United States. Now, Koroshev was not present at this hearing and is not in the United States that we know of, unless he's at RSA or something and looks a lot like Larry Pesci. But they do indictments like this, and the indictment will allow the federal government to seize assets affiliated with this and bar this person from travel in the United States, which they probably don't care about because they're probably not coming to the United States unless they're very foolish. But the total sum of all the charges in the case could result in a maximum penalty of 185 years in prison. Lockbit's been pretty ruthless in targeting pretty much everyone and everything, and they had some very prominent, famous, infamous targets like the Toronto Hospital for Sick Children and things like that, because basically Lockbit was like, hey, we take you down. So that old hacker idea of because we can is very prevalent in this realm. Koroshev and the other affiliates have brought in at least 500 million with an M in ransom payments from victims. And of course, this translates into billions with a B in damage when they have to do recovery, forensics, restoration, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, business losses that result from people not wanting to go someplace that got ransomware. Earlier this year, though, an internal task force that was made up of, an international task force made up of 17 agencies took control of key Lockbit infrastructure, including a bunch of dark websites. An FBI official said that 11 countries were part of the operation, and they seized 11,000 domains that were being used by Lockbit and their ransomware affiliates. I mean, I guess it's good, but it probably won't really do much to reduce ransomware since the people involved can't be arrested because they're nowhere near the United States and they're probably just hanging out in Russia somewhere. And we don't have an extradition arrangement, and of course, with Russia attacking everybody around, we don't have a really solid relationship there. And B, of course, those people can just get new domains and restart the whole thing, but it does slow it down. And law enforcement did want you to know that they have developed some decryption tools for some victims, and that the U.S. Justice Department said that victims who have been targeted by Lockbit are encouraged to contact the FBI, which would enable law enforcement to determine whether or not the affected systems that you have could be successfully decrypted. So I think you can feel pretty comfortable with that if you've got Lockbit encrypted systems. Google released a security update yesterday to address another zero-day in Chrome that is being actively exploited in the wild. I mean, it seems like they update Chrome several times a week now. Fine, I'm happy to restart it if you'll keep patching. But this new one is a use after free problem in the visuals component, and it was reported by an anonymous researcher on the 7th. And if you think bug bounties don't work, you're wrong, because there's people out there who will beat your software to death trying to get bug bounties. So, hey, take advantage. A use after free problem, if you're not familiar with it, is a term that we use to describe what happens when a program accesses a memory location again after that memory location has been unhooked. So the program may initially hook some memory that it's going to use, and then it releases it. And if it's been released, that means other things can easily write to that memory location. And if the program turns right around and accesses this, I could have put a pointer there that would allow, that program to run something totally different from what it's expecting to run. So it's basically a programming flaw. Basically, it's like leaving your lunch sitting on a park bench while you go inside or something to get water. And then when you come back, there's sort of this greasy looking guy standing by the trash can that looks like he might have put his fingers in your lunch while you weren't really there. Yeah, that kind of thing. Google did not reveal any specifics of the attacks they had observed, but published a warning that it does exist in the wild. This is the second actively exploited zero-day in Chrome since the beginning of this year. 3 other zero days in Chrome were disclosed in the Pwn to Own event back in March. I think that what all this patching tells us is that we really have to ensure that we have ways to implement these patches as quickly as possible. For end users, it's like, hey, just click that relaunch button and you'll be fine. But if you're running in controlled environments and you have to push out new images to every workstation or whatever, or your organization requires extensive testing before patches can be pushed, you really may need to evaluate your time to market on patches or how you're going to protect these things, because they just seem to be coming out at a very high speed. And if your organization takes 6 to 12 weeks to review patches and then another 4 to 8 weeks to implement patches, that's going to get a little tedious, I think, for you. So you may want to start looking at those kind of processes. Polish government institutions are being targeted with large-scale malware in a campaign being run by APT 28. And APT 28 is a Russian-linked nation-state group. And I love Poland. I wish I was going there at any given point in time. They have the best food, and it's such a beautiful country. So hi, everybody in Poland, if you're listening. But like most of the common attacks that are being done, and these are attacks that work, mind you, this one was begun with emails being sent to employees trying to entice them to click a link. And of course, they don't just go in and go click this link if you want to see more. They go in with all kinds of social engineering and spear phishing to try to get you engaged with this attacker, who will then somehow get you a link. This was all released by CERT Polska. And if you do click the link, you basically end up on a domain called run.maki.io, which is a legitimate domain, and then that's used to redirect you to another legitimate site called webhook.site. And if you aren't familiar with webhook, It's a free service that is available to devs, and it's basically a way you can see what data is being sent by your website via that webhook site. So you connect up to it, and you can evaluate things that are going on. But because they're using legitimate domains, they basically are hard to spot because you've got stuff that looks legit coming in. Um, it's basically like opening somebody's webhooks, like opening somebody's mail while it's en route. Like envelopes, like old, really old, like steam the envelope open and read the info, reseal it and send it on, and they don't know you looked at it. I mean, the webhook's just a way to, it's a totally legitimate approach, but they're using it in another way. But anyway, the next part of this thing, once you actually end up there, is a download of a zip file, which comes from the webhook site, which makes it, again, look legitimate. It has in it a Windows calculator binary that pretends to be a JPEG. And it also contains a hidden batch script and a DLL called Windows codecs.dll. So if the victim does run this application, the DLL gets sideloaded, which is pretty typical. And then that runs a batch script, which while that's being run, it pops up a web browser window with an image of a woman in a swimsuit with links to the person's real account and social media sites, I guess, to keep you occupied while the rest is going on. I mean, anytime I see a pop-up with somebody in a swimsuit, I'm suspicious, but I'm suspicious anyway. The batch script downloads another JPEG from the webhook site that is renamed to a CMD script, and then it gets executed. So it's not actually a JPEG again, it's a script. They rename the extension and then run it. And then that retrieves the final stage payload, which gathers intel and sends all the details back to the command and control. Cert Polska said that the attack chain is very similar to a previous campaign that propagated a custom backdoor called Head Lace, not lice, but Head Lace, abusing, and then of course these guys abusing these legitimate sites like Maki and Webhook is something that APT 28 is very famous for. And of course, if you're looking at legitimate traffic, it's hard to tell the difference. The recommendation from Cert Polska, and I would recommend this to all of you, is that you should filter emails for links to webhook and run.maki.io, because they said it was very rare that you would ever receive an email that would link to either of those domains. So those are things you can put in place to try to prevent these emails from actually getting through to your employees, because somebody will click on it. I mean, they will. Just live with that idea. ZScaler instantiated an investigation on Wednesday after someone tried to sell access to the company's systems on the dark web. A fairly well-known someone, Intel broker, announced on a popular cybercrime forum that they were selling access to one of the largest cybersecurity companies in the world. A note in the shout box of the forum said that it was ZScaler, even though the original post did not specify which company they were selling access to. Intel broker offered to sell confidential and highly critical logs packed with credentials, along with SMTP access, PAuth access, and SSL passkeys and certificates for $20,000 in crypto. Zscaler then announced launching an investigation shortly after they learned about the claims, and announced that they had found no evidence of the customer and production environments being compromised. In the most recent update to this post, Zscaler said that they were confirming that the production, customer, and corporate environments had not been impacted. They went on to state that what they did find was that an isolated test environment on a single server with no customer data was exposed to the internet, and that the test server was not hosted on their actual infrastructure and had no connectivity to Zscaler environments, and that the test environment had been taken offline for forensic analysis. Now, Intel broker had recently claimed to have stolen U.S. State Department and other government data from Acuity, who confirmed a breach, but said that only non-sensitive old information was actually compromised. Now, Intel broker has been claiming that they had access to U.S. government data and sites for more than a year. But so far, some of the data that they were giving as examples had come from third-party service providers, or was allegedly obtained from government systems that were old, et cetera, et cetera. But some of Intel broker's claims have been proven false or exaggerated. Criminals lying and ripping off other criminals. Hard to imagine that going on, right? These kids today. I mean, in my day, we respected our fellow criminals, right? We gave them a fair shake. I mean, when they went in there and shot Carmen Galante, Lilo. They went and shot him on Knickerbocker Street in Brooklyn. When they went and shot the guy, they not only let him finish lunch and light a nice cigar, but they shot him. Over in Bushwick. It's a really old story. That's from like 1979, but I remember that New York Post cover with Carmen was laying there with a cigar hanging out of his mouth and blood running. Yeah, it was in Joe and Mary's over in Bushwick. But have a plan for this. I mean, regardless of what intel broker has said, him or somebody else may well be targeting you, and it may be real or it may be not real. So be sure your press people are on board and they understand what they're dealing with and how you're going to react to this kind of thing, because this could actually just evolve into a kind of resource grabber kind of attack, right? We make all these announcements to get you all worked up, and it's really just to stir up that or distract you from something else. So start thinking about how you're going to deal with this kind of intel when it comes up. Well, in the through the looking glass category, Arizona in the United States is now training its election workers on how to deal with deep fakes. Apparently, the training was a first of its kind held back in December, and the 2-day course took election workers through training exercises involving the kinds of attacks that AI may be generating in the coming presidential election cycle. The training covered everything from law enforcement operations to attempts to infiltrate technology systems. In fact, the training had a giant welcome video that everyone was greeted with from the Arizona Secretary of State that was being aired. And at the end of the training, they revealed that the welcome message was fake and had been created by an AI out of publicly available images and content from the Secretary of State. One of the trainees said that by the end of the second day of the training, you basically say, trust no one. I was like, hey, that sounds like a pretty good idea at this point. I mean, this is coming. And I know a lot of us it's easy for us to say, well, I'm not involved in the election. I'm not involved in, it doesn't matter. I mean, if it's used there, it's going to be used elsewhere. I mean, you really may want to consider some training for yourself and for your employees, because pretty soon it's going to be basically very easy and cheap to create these for just about anyone that ever posted anything in public. And when your employees are getting video messages or voicemails from the CEO telling them to turn the keys, they may well turn the keys. I mean, I looked into this case for a client where a voice that sounded a lot like the CFO, like we didn't do voice print analysis on it, but I listened to it. I listened to the CFO. Other people that worked there said, yeah, it sounded just like him. This CFO person was leaving messages for various employees, asking them to call in about a missed payment, in this kind of irate way. We heard the recordings on the voicemails where it's just like, what the hell's going on down there? Kind of stuff. And the employees were panicking because apparently the CFO was not a very nice person anyway. But it was kind of their job to pay bills. And these were large scale bills that had apparently not been paid. And so someone called in, they called in, said they were the CFO, and then told them to get this handled, and then told them who they needed to call at the recipient of the payment. So they called that number. And they got an account to transfer the funds. And, they had been told by the CFO's voice, transfer this, do it now, do it today, or somebody's going to be fired. And they went in and did it. And it wasn't the CFO, of course, and it wasn't a supplier. And $150,000 disappeared into the ether. And then they got fired for that. So you might want to consider how you validate instructions like this. I mean, I don't know if we're going to have to go to some kind of digital hash signature, I don't know, past secret phrases that are going to be used when the CFO called, but you definitely need to get a policy together on this, because despite all the political terrorism stuff that we're expecting, this stuff can readily be used for all sorts of deception. Well, for what is a man was he got, if not himself, then he has naught. To say the things he truly feels and not the words of one who kneels. The record shows he took the blows and he did it his way. Please welcome old Blue Eyes, Aaran Leyland.
I was so tempted to break in the song there because
I thought you would.
Well, apparently my microphone's been the wrong way round for 2 years, so possibly I sound like sexual chocolate today. What do you think?
You do now. I mean, I'm so turned on at this point. It's beyond comprehension.
It's like, can you imagine all them people for years now just not hearing my voice back to front? How crazy is that?
I mean, we've thought you sounded like Porky Pig for like 2 years. And now you sound like Barry White. It's like,
yeah.
I'm the
Well,
soldier of love,
I
baby.
need to smoke more cigars. Through
But you could sing the Sid Vicious version of it. I think you could probably get through that.
Yeah, maybe we start a karaoke podcast. Okay, better get into it today because Doug, you're telling a lot of information today. I'm going to hit this hard. Okay. Today's article from the Register: America's enemies targeting U.S. critical infrastructure should be a wake-up call. Okay, there's been a super hot topic at RSA conference this week. It's like, which they're now calling RSAC, and I just thought it was RSA. I guess it must have got complicated over names with something. So RSAC or conference, whatever it is. Here's some direct quotes. Digital intruders from China, Russia, and Iran breaking into U.S. water systems this year should be a wake-up call. That's Rob Joyce, former NSA cyber boss. More of Rob. None of that was significantly consequential, meaning recent attacks, although I beg to disagree, Rob, but semantics. But he did say that those countries that had hackers to combat our critical infrastructure should be a wake-up call, and that there are people out there who, when there's global tensions, feel that their role is to pick up cyber arms. Go wild. More Rob, you get the added specter of sometimes the nation state intelligence services are wrapping themselves in a cloak of anonymity of the hacktivist to go out and give it a nudge even further. I don't know if he's just like not allowed to say stuff that he might really want to, but anonymity of hacktivists is very true because at the end of the day, it's government nation state stuff, and saying that it's hacktivists is not really being true to oneself, in my personal opinion. Okay, he also said it's scary to watch. It is. He says, at some point, somebody's going to land in a place in critical infrastructure that's going to matter. And oh boy, is that true. I don't think they're doing the assessment of how significant that attack will be. Also, I don't think that's true. My dog's having a proper roll round in the background. I don't know if you can hear him. We'll hope he's being quiet in a minute. Okay, we could also see somebody tip the scale by overachieving in one of these attacks without understanding the implications. Well, that happens all the time, and it's going to happen again. And there's so much talk about this, about how you reach so far and then it just gets out of control. Just look at the Morris worm, right? He talked about the crew, Volt Typhoon's what he was talking about there, I think. He says it's stealthy and hard to find because it uses so-called living of the land techniques. I like that terminology. And they come in every 15, 30, 90 days and just touch these accounts to verify they still can get in. So when you're looking at, we all love Rita and we all love where it came from and stuff like that. But when the beaconing is like days, months, that's super, super hard to find, nearly impossible. And he goes on to say that's really quiet activity. Yeah, it is when you think some beaconing could be minutes or at the most hours. And he goes on to say, especially if they're using legitimate credentials, which is really cool. So let's go on to David Luber, the current NIC cybersecurity director. One would hope that he knows what he's talking about. And he says you can use your imagination on where some of those physical manifestations can occur. Oh, yes, you can. And he also says what's different about Volt Typhoon is that placement, access to your critical infrastructure for the purpose of computer network attack at a time when they choose, with the intent to cause societal panic. And it would. It's like, you can imagine not having water for a few days. Well, actually, there's a place in America without water for years, is it? Anyway, I won't go into that. And with the intent to also have some of the impacts to cyber to physical. So this is really important. It's just showing that people right at the top of cyber now are actually talking about it not just being ones and zeros manifestation. This is actually stuff breaking. Imagine a chlorine tank in water or something like that, and all the stuff that they put in water to make it taste nice or sort of kill all the germs and that. And then you pump in loads of extra and poison everyone. He goes on to say critical orgs may need to rethink their log management and retention policies and implement stronger identity and access management problems. So that is super, super true. Right. I'm going to sort of cut this all very short today, and I'm just going to tell you a little bit about Vault Typhoon, and then I'm going to read my end bit. So Vault Typhoon, also known by various other names, is Vanguard Panda, Bronze Silhouette, and Dev 0391, and they must have an APT name, but I don't know it. Maybe Doug knows it. Is identified as a state-sponsored Chinese cyber operation that has compromised thousands of internet-connected devices, particularly targeting Western critical infrastructure like naval ports, internet service providers, communication services, and utilities. And as said before by them big men at the top of the show, the operation is characterized by its living off the land techniques, which involve exploiting vulnerabilities in routers, firewalls, and virtual private networks using stolen passwords or administrator credentials. This approach allows the hacker to remain undetected for extended periods, often in outmoded technology that lacks regular security updates. And their activities are focused. This is the most important bit, right? Their activities are not focused on espionage or data theft per se, but on pre-positioning for potential acts of sabotage. So they're getting in there, they're staying very low, they're beaking in not very often, and they're just there waiting for the big war to come, and then they're going to shut everything down and shit, and it's going to be horrible. Hopefully we're doing the exact same thing, but bigger and better, one would expect. So as we said, the intent is to cause societal panic and physical damage by disrupting critical infrastructure at the time of attackers. Do you know what, guys? We're not doing enough. Like, we're not doing enough. And there's bits here where they talk about hacktivists, and that makes me laugh. It just means Chinese government, right? Mostly. And there's bits where it goes on to say potentially linked to government intelligence. Potentially, they say. Yeah, whatever. It is, right? It is what it is. Let's call it what it is. So anyway, so risky behavior persists, including the use of default passwords and the disabling multi-factor authentication, not using it, exposing critical OT. We're not doing enough. We're exposing critical OT to public internet. It's just not good enough. Complacency is not an option. We need to be proactive. Good things: improved log management, better identity and access management policies, all essential. Anyway, that's me for today. Back to the man who logs all my jokes and uses them against me, Dr. Doug, on an island in a home studio. Over to you.
Thank you, Aaron. Always happy to be logging you. And finally, apparently there is a World Password Day on the 2nd of May. I honestly didn't know that. But this particular article was about the National Cybersecurity Center, the NCSC, and the United Kingdom's cybersecurity branch. We talk about them a lot, and they have a lot of guidance and so forth. So the NCSC issued guidance that passwords should be created out of a string of 3 random words. Okay, I mean, that can be the start to strong password policy. Although, personally, more case and symbols and so forth. But that passphrase idea of assembling things out of, words and whatever, especially if they're non-related words, has been around for quite a while. And it can be effective, and it's a way that people can remember their passwords. But this story is not really about the policy, goods and bads, as much as it was about the fact that reporters who were attending an NCSC event that was being led by former Prime Minister David Cameron were told that the door code for the UK Cybersecurity Agency was 1234. Okay. I've never seen something like that before, but the code was announced from the stage apparently as well. So they just had a guy with, on the loudspeaker basically saying, and the door code is 1234. Now, before all the condemnation flies and we get all sanctimonious about it, I think the point to me of this article, and it was written kind of tongue in cheek, I think, but to me, the point of this article was that you have to assess risk. And honestly, Zero Trust would have us issue every reporter a custom code and track who used it and when and why and so forth. And and honestly, that's not a bad idea. But at the same time, the risk was pretty low. I think Mr. Cameron is the foreign secretary now, so he's obviously an important government official or what have you. But I think the risk of anybody getting in there was pretty low. And was it worth it to set up a whole bunch of special security stuff for a bunch of reporters? Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. I don't know. But it's an interesting story that shows how easy it can be to create issues, and that it also should remind us not to overkill solutions at the same time. I mean, I've seen both directions. I've seen door codes that were 0000 that got you in the server room and also the front door of the building at 3 a.m. I've seen ridiculous door codes that were so complex that they had to write them down on Post-it notes and stick them on the wall, and still nobody could get it correct, and so forth. I mean, it's really easy to say that every door code should be a 64-byte string of random letters, numbers, and symbols, and maybe it should be. But you're going to have a lot of security calls and misuse of this with, I saw one once where they had these really elaborate security procedures to get in and out of the server room. And guess what they did? They propped the door open with a trash can because nobody wanted to type in their 16-character code they couldn't remember off of a card and then swipe their badge and then do a retinal scan. So they just propped the door open with a trash can. That was how I got in. The door was open. But, if you want your people going into the restroom to have a retinal scan at the door in the stall, and before they can open the toilet lid and get to the toilet paper, they have to have, like repeated input of all this stuff. That's going to be a lot of fun on Taco Truck Tuesday, let me tell you. Because I do remember this place I consulted. They required you to card swipe out of where you were, card swipe on the restroom to get into the restroom. And it didn't always work. Like you're swiping, and you probably shouldn't have had what you had for lunch, and you're swiping, and you can't get in, and yeah, it can be kind of a problem. So it's kind of a fun story, but it definitely should remind us that we should look at these things. We should make assessments of these things and understand our threat surface and our map, because if we don't, we either have too much security or not enough security when it counts the most. And so, think about that and how you're going to look at these kinds of things, because you don't want to end up getting made fun of in the press. But at the same time, was it really necessary to have like massive security on this event? I mean, I don't know. And and I'm not trying to tell them what to do. I will next be live at the Fairmont in Dallas, Texas on the 21st and 22nd of May for the Millennium Alliance CISO gathering. So if you're going to be there or you want to come, you can check out the site for that. But that's the news. Thank you, Aaron, and we will see you next time on the Security Weekly News.